Welcome to the 18th episode of Renegade Thinkers Live, a show that promises to be long on marketing insights and short on overhyped buzzwords. We'll be drinking in the latest tactics and the coolest gin. Yep, this may be the only live marketing show that also features a gin tasting. This show is being live streamed via our friends at Restream, and today we'll be tasting Ula Gin. Okay, I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from my home studio in New York City. Let's get one thing out of the way, shall we? Forget the notion of born leaders. Leadership is a skill that can be learned, not necessarily in a single book, but more through practice and even trial and error. It is a skill that needs continual refinement and is always when you talk to great leaders, they will always say it's a work in progress. There is no one personality profile that owns leadership. You can't say, I'm just not a born leader, I'm not a leader. Jim Collins in Good to Great described an amazing leader who stayed out of the spotlight, acting like an invisible hand guiding their corporations. So on this show, we're going to explore the path to leadership. We're going to focus on the C as in chief marketing, the chief and chief marketing officer. And we're going to specifically talk about the lessons 3 CMOs have learned along the way, on their way to getting to the role and the most recent challenges these leaders are facing as leaders. With that, let's bring on Amy Messano, CMO of Altair and star of episode 192 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. Hello, Amy.
Hi, Drew. How are you?
I'm great. And how are you?
I'm fantastic. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's like you joined us from vacation. We talk about dedication. It's amazing.
Well, you are such a gracious host. Anything for you.
Oh, well, that's very kind, and that will definitely go to my head. But so let's talk about this. Before you were a CMO, I'm guessing you worked for a leader or two that you really admired. What were some of the lessons that you started to observe as you were coming up the ranks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think that you almost learned as much from the not great leaders as from the great leaders. And I would say I've seen 2 sides of this particular example. And one is to empower your people and to let them lead. And the opposite of that is micromanaging. So I think that is very important, is to really, equip people with what they need to do their job successfully, and then get out of the way. So it's sort of, you're there when they need you, but you're not blocking them and really helping them to do their job so that they get recognition and appreciation, and they're learning and developing for future leadership.
And these lessons were ground home but perhaps by a boss who wasn't those characteristics.
I've actually had both. I've had one great one like that and one not so great one.
And what's so interesting to me as I think about what you were saying about, tell them what you want them to do and then get out of the way, is you have to be careful. There are times where there's certain individuals, right? I remember one leadership course I had early in my career where they talked about, there are some people who are high motivation, high learners, and high skill, right? You can just say, go, and they'll get there. But there's some people who don't know how to do a task. And if you assign them a task and don't build the steps along the way. So some of it is also sort of understanding who you're dealing with and not dealing with everybody the same way, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think a huge part of great leaders is really taking the time to get to know your team. It's an emotional thing, right? Coaching and also learning and listening to what kind of a person they are and how they like to receive information. Maybe they're not comfortable speaking in front of a big group. Maybe they're better one-on-one. So just understanding how they work, and then you help them again to be successful with what they need. So it's really taking the time to listen and understand what makes people tick and what they need to do to be successful. So listening is it, not just closing your mouth while they're talking, but listen, absorb, and maybe come back. Doesn't even have to be right away. Take some time to process and think about it, and then come back with solutions. I always try to come from a place of solutions.
And so it's not just about telling them what to do?
No, no. They tell me what to do most of the time. I mean, really, listening is a huge part of it. So I actually don't think it's always just telling them what to do. I think a lot of it is, I really depend on teams and people and, leadership teams, and not just, I don't sort of say, oh, I'm the boss, do what I say. I have a great leadership team, and we do a lot of things together. So I think a lot of it is listening more than telling, quite frankly.
Well, there's on episode 100, I had my father on the show. He was 92 at the time. He just celebrated his 95th birthday. And he talked about the lost art of listening and how he finds that, lots of people have lots of things they want to say, but aren't very good at asking the questions and being an active listener, which I think is such a big part of this. Now,
I couldn't agree more.
It was a little bit easier in the pre-COVID period. Now we're all separated, and we're all separated all the time. Did that put a sort of a new twist in your sort of leadership style?
It did. I have people sort of all corners of the globe, and I'm used to traveling a ton. And I have, you hit the brick wall. So a couple things that I started to do was, a weekly email. Just as sort of a personal update and what's going on with the business, and really checking in on people. COVID was so different on so many people. Maybe there was, you have single people stuck by themselves in a tiny apartment in Tokyo, and you have people with 18 people in their house and dogs and going crazy. So, and some people were sick, and some people lost loved ones. So it was very different, or financial strains. I mean, it was devastating for everyone. So part of it, I felt I was very open and honest, and I wrote emails that sometimes had very little to do with work, but they were like what I learned this week. And sometimes it was I had to go in the bathroom and cry, or I dropped a pot of chicken soup that I made all day, and, and learning, just sort of sharing and being really vulnerable. And I think it helped people. I got so many emails back, just one-off emails, just sort of saying how that really helped them, just that they know that I'm going through it too. And just some of the things that I always told people to walk. So I post videos. That's kind of my sort of meditation therapy, is walking. I take long walks every day. So sometimes I do, videos from the walk, which might sound cheesy, but it's really just trying to connect with people in different ways. Because people felt so alone and so disconnected, and not knowing of when it was going to end. And so I did a lot more, very, very informal, just very open, very honest, lots of communicating through emails and videos and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny, as I was thinking about all the huddles that we had during the height of COVID, and a word that kept coming up is empathy. And, this was one that for some CMOs, this was a new thought.
Yeah.
But it really did bring out, if you were naturally empathetic, in some ways you had a competitive advantage if you had to learn that it was difficult. But the honesty and the sort of, you had to work harder to make human connections. And I honestly think that part of it, really some great leadership things came out of that. I mean, the connections that you actually made during this period were, I imagine, I know a lot of CMOs who are a lot closer to their people now than they were before COVID.
Yeah. And I think that's true. So for, our headquarter building, which we're outside of Detroit, we'd be, normally a lot of people in the room, and then people maybe on a conference call in Asia or Europe or somewhere. And now it's actually better for them because we can see their faces. So there are good parts of it in that regard. But I think I'm a mom, I have 3 kids, and I think I'm empathetic by nature, but I think I've learned that nurturing as I've gone. And a lot of that I sort of apply. I used to say great leader sort of, it was like a mama bear, protect and nurture. And they don't need a lot of protecting where I work now, but listening and guiding and the nurturing and just letting people know that you care about them. I mean, it's emotional, right? You spend more time with the people you work with than really anybody else. So just knowing that you're there to listen, no matter what it's about, it doesn't necessarily have to be work related. And I have found so many learnings and so many bright sides of COVID, just the way people have, amazing performance, new ways to do things, new ways to think about things, new ways to problem solve, new ways to collaborate. So there is some bright side that the people are smart, and people rise to the challenge, and the way that people protected each other, looked out for each other, connected, supported each other. When someone's like just had needs a little bit of time off, someone else picked up the slack for them. So that kind of, I always say marketing is a team sport. So the way they have, come together and people have come together as teams has been remarkable. And, I've shed a couple tears over it, quite frankly.
I know. Well, I need to sort of, we need to get Bill on. So I'm gonna say goodbye for a moment. We're gonna talk to Bill Strawderman, who's the CMO of GS1 US. So Bill, hello.
Hello, Drew. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Let's talk about a couple of standout leaders that you've worked with. What sort of did you pick up from them in terms of insights on what it takes to be a leader?
Okay, I think like Amy, I would say I've learned from great and learned from not so great in the same kind of approach. But I would sort of describe intellectual curiosity and a restlessness as sort of one trait that I kind of admire and have picked up. Another is this genuine care and respect for people, which during COVID, that empathy had to be dialed up significantly. And I think for me, it's taken a while for me to get there. Probably in some of my failings, it would be evident that I had a way to grow from being, a starter to where I am today. I think the other is this idea of a growth mindset, right? We're not out there competing for resources. We're out there really trying to grow people, grow the business, grow customers, and grow opportunities.
And that's such an interesting way to think about it. So, one of the things that really struck, and what Amy and I started talking about is during COVID, it was really hard to push people because they were being pushed emotionally in so many different ways. And I know that some CMOs were frustrated by that fact. It was just hard. You didn't know how much you could ask of people during this time set. So, and I'm curious as a leader, how you sort of worked around this. We're growing, we need to grow, and growth usually means more effort, or it certainly means smarter effort. And so it's a demand, right? So how did you sort of reconcile that, particularly in the last year and a half when it was really hard to know what was going on in people's lives?
I mean, I think, Drew, that's a little bit of sort of the sensing approach you have to take with individuals. And it's knowing when you want to press the pedal down and when you need to put on the brake. So really having that clarity around what's really important to get done versus what's, something that you can be more flexible on. And we would have the discussions with individuals and we would invite them to declare when they really needed that extra care, extra concern, or extra flexibility in terms of elongating something that, frankly, didn't have to rise to be the top hit of the day. I think the other thing I would say that was sort of all part of that, developing a sense of shared humanity was really taking the time not to be too serious about, if you were in the middle of a call and you had kind of cats and dogs or, wandering spouses or, other kinds of amalgamations of kind of work and life bleeding into, what was happening. So kind of had to adapt your seriousness, right? You had to be prepared to sort of just let humanity happen and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's so funny. We all got to know each other's dogs and kids during this time frame. And by the way, this is the hour in which my dog almost always decides that he needs to come in for a hug. So it is quite possible Louis will make an appearance. I think it's interesting, and you talk about understanding what's a priority and not. Do you have an operating system, if you will, that you use as a leader to make sure that everybody understands what is sort of our team goals and how the individuals fit into that?
Yeah, I believe we have a pretty clear approach to setting, corporate goals, and those corporate goals are actually shared more or less across the entire organization. So that's sort of a good guiding light for many people to organize a lot of their activities around, right? So if you understand how your work contributes to that, the achievement of that corporate goal, it really, in some sense, helps you prioritize that versus another thing that might be more, I'd say, longer term focused or might be more task focused. And those are the types of things where it's good to open up the dialogue with people about what really is sort of essential versus what is kind of more, no, that's center plate. That's really kind of a tomorrow thing. We can certainly negotiate how and when those things get done because they don't rise to the occasion. And then individuals have their own sets of goals too, where we do have a process where, mid-year check-ins, there's a flexibility to trade off one goal versus another to the extent that you had other things that came in that were a little bit hotter and things that, again, back to level of importance, didn't necessarily need to rise to the top of your stack.
And, it just occurred to me as you were talking here, and we didn't talk about this in prep for the show, but I'm thinking about how do you make sure that you are being the leader that you want to be and that you're sort of weighing, measuring yourself and saying, gee, I could, how do you keep your saw sharp, so to speak?
So, I think there are a bunch of ways. When it comes to sort of that checking in with the team, it's really sort of the informal ways that Amy described. And I think the more formal approaches to kind of skip levels and to all of the structured meetings we have with either program teams or with managers directly, just sort of checking in one-on-one with them. In terms of the ways I like to sharpen my saw, I love solving puzzles, so I'm kind of like a crossword guy. I've at least recently picked Sudoku back up. When I go on a run, I go in part for that purpose of just sort of having some meditative time. I actually find problem solving, sometimes you spend too much time sort of focused on the problem. And when you step away from it and you're distracted by some other kind of, I guess, healing activity in some respects, you can be struck with sort of an inspiration and say, I finally got it.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I just happened to was listening to a book on getting things done and sort of getting for creative people who might get stuck. And it was, we just in the first chapter, it was step away. Just, sometimes you have to go backwards to go forward. Just leave it over there and make a new list of happy things that are happening in your life. Well, that's great. Okay. Crosswords and Sudokus and meditation. All right. Well, let's bring on Toni Clayton-Hine, who is the CMO of EY Americas and the star of episode 65 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. So hello, Toni.
Hello, how are you?
I am great, thank you. Let's talk about a couple of standout leaders you've worked for and what stood out about them.
I think that their ability to communicate and do so in a way that is so audience driven is the thing that always strikes me about great leaders. To understand when you're talking to a bunch of people that are maybe on the front lines and salespeople and be really excited and energetic. And if you're talking to people that are more in the back office operational, to be probably a bit more focused and detail oriented. And when you're talking to clients, to be able to think about how to put yourselves in their shoes and the things that they're looking to articulate. I've always just been struck by those leaders that can really understand the importance of time and place and individual personalities to some extent, or the general personalities of a cohort, and be able to connect at that level. It's always been really impressive.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. And at the top of the show, I talked about there is sort of a cult of personality around one leadership type that are really charismatic, and they're good at that. And I wonder, as I'm thinking about it, yes, they need to be good communicators, and yes, they need to understand the audience. But I wonder if they always have to be that great, sort of follow me, let's go charge the hill kind of thing. I mean, that wasn't the Jim Collins model. And I wonder if you've ever worked with there are such a thing as an introverted leader. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
Oh, I mean, just all sorts of them throughout my career. Not always have been the most, gregarious and charismatic. I remember one leader who was just so intelligent and operated at such an incredible level that it was sometimes difficult to, as a marketer, to help them communicate and help them formulate thoughts, almost savant-like, just in terms of their intelligence, and just being able to help them think through how to slow down and to lead a team, from a marketing perspective, just helping that communication internally and externally come through was really interesting. And then, having spent some time in my career in the research side, those folks tend to be a lot more introverted, analytical, and I know I kind of gravitate towards the smart anyway. So to me, like that rock star person is not always the most charismatic, but the brain power that they can exhibit, or just the way of thinking, has always been really interesting to me personally anyway.
Have you ever worked for someone who had to be the smartest person in the room?
Many times, yes.
And can we talk about the problem of that as a leader?
Well, it comes sometimes they have to be the smartest people in the room because they are in fact the smartest people in the room. So that is interesting themselves. It's sometimes just lack of self-awareness that they're coming off as, constantly needing to ensure that people understand that. But I would say by and large, over my career, I've had more people that have exhibited more stewardship, servant leadership, than the other way around, right? So that people really understand and want to pull out the best of people, and be very generous with their time and their accolades, and the support of the team around them to be able to shine. So, I mean, who doesn't want that, right? Who doesn't want to follow somebody who understands the power of the team?
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so easy. It's so easy to forget to be generous with praise, right? Because you have so much to do.
Exactly. I mean, I think back on one leader that was just one of my favorite bosses to work for. And, he really opened every conversation and at a group level with a thank you. And it just struck me and I just loved it. I probably emulate that more than any other sort of leadership styles that I like, which is to make sure that if we're taking an opportunity to address a group, whether it's a meeting of 5 or a meeting of 50 or a meeting of 500, that you take the opportunity to say thank you, thank them for their time, thank them for the work that they do. And, I took that from him, and I always liked that. And I just thought that was such a great way to kick something off.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a perfect place. Let's bring Amy and Bill back. And I'm curious, Amy and I started getting into how your leadership evolved. So Bill and Toni, did you have to make some adjustments during the COVID period to sort of make sure you were sort of, because it was a new challenge?
I mean, right now, I think that it was, for me, I tend to be very casual as a leader. I'm very open and, hopefully very approachable. And so the thing that I was struck by during COVID was to try to think through how words matter. So, if I may say something flip and not think about it so much, but during COVID, I felt like there's so much tension in the air and in the environment and in the family and in the workplace. And so no flip comments, right? So just there's too much opportunity for things to be misinterpreted. So I know personally that was something that I was very focused on trying to, not sure I accomplished it very well, but definitely a focus area for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Bill, what about you? I love that notion that, suddenly you didn't, well, if you're in the office and you say something flip, you can sort of recover. Oh, I was just kidding or whatever. But if you do it and it's a Zoom and people aren't paying attention or whatever, it can just come across as, oh my God, what is she talking about? So Bill, what was your sort of adjustment that you made as a leader in COVID?
Yeah, I think the big adaptation for me is, I have a team that is largely co-located. And so you walk down the hall, you have the opportunity to kind of, pass the time, casually, or, kind of really kind of say, hey, I've got this, thing I want to, interrogate with you right away. And what's very difficult in COVID is sort of resisting that urge to make your curiosity someone else's, time problem. Because the big deal, I think, for people was that they didn't really feel as in control of their time. And when you're time boxed at work, it's very different than being untime boxed in a virtual environment. And so learning that self-control, if you will, was sort of an adjustment I had to make to keep the team's sanity, as good as it could be considering the circumstances.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm thinking back to podcasts that we recorded in April and May of 2020, and there was a lot of conversation during that period about helping people deal with time, right? And part of it was we were all working, we weren't commuting, so we just added those to our work days. And, and now we're coming out of this, and some people are commuting and some people aren't, but the hours still seem to be really long. And it feels like something where, as a leader, this is a moment where you have to hold up stop signs and really pay attention to, are folks taking their vacations? Are folks sort of taking time to, sharpen their saws and do something else? So anyway, that's me but I'm wondering, are you thinking about that? Is that on your list, Toni?
About making sure people are taking vacations and personal time?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have that as a firm-wide initiative, right? Just to, we moved from, stated vacation to unlimited vacation, like so many other companies have done. And one of the things, we did that at the same time or just before COVID really hit. So we're really mindful of that, because we would hate for this kind of unlimited vacation turned into I'll never take vacation. And we just came off of one of the things that EY does. It's incredible, is they close the firm for the week of 4th of July and the week of Christmas. And I never realized what an amazing gift that is until it happened. And, when, you usually go away on vacation and come back to a flood of emails for people that are still working. And it's nice when everybody is off at the same time. It's unbelievable and really helps everybody recharge.
Yeah, I love that. What a gift to everybody. It's so interesting. All right. Well, this is a moment where, if you don't mind, I'm gonna plug CMO Huddles for a second. CMO Huddles, for those who are watching, it was launched in 2020. It's a invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described a huddle as a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. Anyway, I'm just curious, Toni, Bill, Amy, if you have any comments that you would like to share about CMO Huddles. Not to put you on the spot, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll be happy.
I think they're great.
Okay, well, let's start with Amy. Go ahead.
So I have found them to be very helpful, just especially during COVID, again, when you can't get out there as much and talk to people. And how, for example, moving to hybrid, all virtual, and when will people go back? And to be able to ask questions from your peers and get real answers in a protected, sort of safe space. And Drew's done a great job of actually sort of connecting people one-off or something. So I found it super useful.
Bill, you were going to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I lost the audio there for a second.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the value of this, sort of getting to know people who are not necessarily in your daily orbit, and learning from a community of people who are facing similar problems, in other cases very dissimilar problems to those that you have. And I'd say the other thing that was a fantastic use of the network connection, Drew, was kind of the one-on-one discussion when I wanted to really interrogate some e-commerce related issues I was having with another CMO. You were able to identify someone, and it was a very, very productive use of time, and I was greatly appreciative of having that network connection.
I love it. We need to get more huddlers to do those one-on-ones. Anyway, Toni, any thoughts?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay, first of all, I learn something every single time. So, and the fact that if you can't make it, you do this incredible recap so that you can scan through with all these resources is huge. And then the second thing is the Slack channel. So, your ability to then show up, or if you can't make it, you see the recap, and then if you've got a question, you post it in the Slack channel, and then people can respond and send suggestions. So it's not really just when we meet, it's really as ingrained or pervasive as you want it to be. And like I said, I learned something every single time.
I love it. All right. Well, this is a perfect time. Thank you all for those comments. Perfect time. We're going to take a quick break. I have to go to my fridge, get my chilled glass, get my Ula. We're going to be joined by the founder and head distiller in a second. So let's run the video and go get our chilled glasses.
A smart person learns from their mistakes. A wise person learns from other people's mistakes. There's great value in this CMO huddle.
This one has consistently brought value to the table. There's value at every step.
The continuity of familiar faces is also quite nice. You can start to form some deeper relationships.
It's a nice break in your week from a lot of other meetings.
None of us is as smart as all of us. Every huddle I go away with one idea that I didn't know before.
We have implemented a number of things that have made a significant amount of difference.
It's a really high caliber group of very passionate CMOs.
Share these best practices, but do it in a circle of trust.
It's an amazing group of people.
Jackie has constantly reminded me that we need a call to action on everything we do. So if you are a CMO that can share and care and dare with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com. How's that for a call to action, Jackie? All right. Okay. So Kirby Callis Lewis from Ula Gin. Kirby, are you with us?
I sure am, yeah.
Nice to see you. And wow, look, is that the distillery in the background there?
Yeah, it is. Yep. Yeah. We moved not too many months ago and couldn't be happier. We quadrupled our size and needed every inch of that.
Wow. So let's talk about, first of all, Ula, the name is kind of cool. What's the story with that?
Well, let's see. In some ways, I feel like I used the name twice, but it was the name of my sidekick at the time, the best German Shepherd to ever live. She is now passed on, but I gave her naming rights. It was just about two years. It was just the two of us, and then I started hiring quickly. As it looked like the markets were responding to what we were doing.
So talk a little bit about the gin. And I know, so Toni has the main gin. Do you have the bottle? Can you show it, Toni? There it is. Look. So yeah, big gin. Okay. Talk a little bit about what Toni should be tasting and the story about this gin, and just give us a sense of it.
So, this gin is, unbeknownst to me, I made a new American style gin. I didn't have it pigeonholed when I was making it, but that's what you would call this. There's a inherent sweetness. It's a vodka base, white winter wheat, Eastern Washington grains. And I love the balance in this. That's the word I would think of with this one. Certainly juniper forward, like gin should be, but there's a real nice balance with the juniper and the other botanicals in it. 13 different botanicals, and yeah, it's just a lovely gin. It's a workhorse in the bar, but also I think it's best just shake it over ice like a completely dry martini.
So a completely dry martini. That's a man who speaks my language. So let's talk about, so Toni, have you tasted it?
No, I've been waiting. I've been waiting for this moment.
Come on, let's go. Let's taste it.
Okay, I've poured it in. Here it is in my chilled glass.
Nice. Good.
There we go. Do I swirl it around like I would swirl a glass of wine?
Sure.
Or
And what do you smell?
Like gin.
That's juniper that you're getting there.
And And I definitely smell, 12 botanicals. I don't know about 13, but 12 are definitely coming forward.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, I'm tasting it now.
Yeah, good.
It's delicious.
Yummy, huh? Now,
is there like a licorice flavor a little bit to it? Would that make sense? Or am I making something up?
Yeah. Nope, that's definitely in there. There's some fennel seed.
Fennel, yeah.
That I think is informative. There's also a peppery note that kind of relates grains of paradise, an African spice that I think relates to that licorice kind of spicy note.
It's wonderful, and it's so smooth. There's no like angry, reminiscent of maybe some college days where gin did not go so well. Like this is really super smooth, and it's by itself. It doesn't need a mixer or anything. It's wonderful.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. One of my proudest moments is when somebody does have that college history and has not drank gin for 20 years, and then they get talked into trying ours and they're back. And they love it.
Okay, that's really happening right now. That is. I was a little bit nervous because it has been maybe slightly more than 20 years, but it's been a very long time.
Oh,
so just to add to this, I was in California last weekend, and I picked up the Ula, the barrel finished gin, which has a slightly tinted color, and it's reminiscent of an Old Tom. I wouldn't call it an Old Tom because it's not quite, it doesn't pick up any of that barrely flavor, but I like it. Is there a difference in terms of the botanicals you use for the barrel version?
No, it's kind of funny. I assumed that I would use a completely separate botanical recipe, but I think I got up to like a dozen different variations and kept coming back to that flagship gin. Yeah, we do make another gin that's a little bit more London Dry. Well, not a little bit more, definitely London Dry style.
Right.
And the sweetness in our flagship gin just worked the best of anything I could come up with. And it's been a category winner, lots of gold medals. It's been really, it's a tiny category, so it's never going to be, a workhorse for the distillery, but it has definitely helped brand building. So it's been well received.
Perfect. Okay, well, we have a botanical expert. We're going to bring on Nicole. And Nicole, one of the things that we noticed in your 13 botanicals that you have something called black lemons. And we couldn't help but investigate that. Nicole, what the heck are black lemons?
Well, Drew, black lemons are dry citrus fruits, typically limes, and they have a sweet and tangy flavor with a caramelized notes. And they're also a very popular ingredient in several Middle Eastern culinary traditions. And if you have, any digestion, problems, they're also a major digestion aid. And fun fact, the name black lemon comes from the imperfect translation from the Arabic language.
Oh, so it really should be black limes. But
yes.
You would think we could fix that. All right. Well, look, this has been amazing. Toni, this is really, I'm so grateful for the gin. Kirby, thank you for joining us here on Renegade Thinkers Live.
Pleasure.
And we will toast to your good health and your good success.
Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. That is always fun. And now we are back. Amy and Bill, you have bottles somewhere out there, and you'll get to join this fun after the fact. This is the challenge of a live show. Okay. So let's talk about some tough moments. And the good news is we all learn from things that happen. That when something didn't exactly go as you expected, because you've talked about having leaders that you learned as much from the ones that weren't good. can you think about some situations and maybe share a situation where, gee, maybe we could have, if I'd done it differently, I would have had a different outcome? Anybody want to jump in on that one? I know it's not an easy, and we're going to be exposing ourselves a bit, but I could go eeny, meeny, Bill.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Look, so I would say this is actually kind of maybe not a specific situation, but a problem I've had to grow beyond, which is the propensity to react versus respond, right? So you're in a situation, you're kind of confronted with something that isn't going right. And, one way to handle it is to kind of get curious and to step back and kind of diagnose what you think went wrong. And the other is to just sort of light a fuse. So learning that, and this is like a Covey line, that there's a space between stimulus and response that gives you that ability to respond more than react, is kind of a learning curve moment for me throughout my career. I mean, I'm still not perfect at it, but I think I've gotten a lot better than when I was, say, 25 years old.
Oh my God. If I have one major flaw as a leader, that is it. Absolutely. Because I like to, boom, I see the problem, I hear it, I go, oh, we can solve that like this. Just go boom, boom, boom. And, give yourself some time. I really appreciate, that nuance before you react and respond. Just pause. Because if someone's bringing you a problem and you solve it in 5 seconds, what are you saying to them really? Such a good point. Thank you. All right. Who's next? Who has something they could share?
I would really build on what Bill said. I remember I had a boss one time who told me just to look at my shoes before you responded if it was something you needed to think about. But I think it's a much longer, especially working in global environments, to take the time to make sure that you're not offending anybody if you speak, and people can understand you. So speak slowly. So I do think the whole process of taking time to answer and also to say, I don't know. It's okay to be vulnerable, but I will share. So for myself in marketing, I've worked in a lot of technology companies, and sometimes real smart like engineers and technical people, or even hardcore, sales guys think they can do marketing. So I have had to learn actually that too, to not react right away. My kids can do social media, so it must be easy, or, so that I found over time, I am much more easy. Now I can handle it much better than when I was early in my career and I'm sort of personally offended by that. But now I understand, I'm just much better to process it, and I know how to be able to respond and not react. I love what Bill said. So that sort of just digesting information and responding more appropriately.
Yeah, I love that point, Amy. I love that point. It so drives me crazy. I talk about it in the book right away that, the CMOs are confronted with this all the time. I watch the Super Bowl, so I know advertising. And it's like, it's going to the CFO and say, hey, I balanced my checkbook. I can handle the books. It's an unfortunate reality, but good for you for figuring out how to sort of, just not react to that one. Toni.
I'm going to jump on that a little bit in a maybe different way, which is I kind of come to the point where I used to feel like if somebody was trying to help you market or giving you a requirement to say, we have to go to this event, or we have to do it this way, or this is, my kids can do social media, which I know how many times have we heard that. I've tried to train myself to stop and think about the essence of what they're trying to do, which is, I think about it, try to stop thinking about it as, of course, who's the better, expert here versus they're trying to actually help, and there is good energy there. And how do you take the idea that they want to do something and corral the energy and celebrate that a little bit. So when someone comes to us and says, I want to do the 77th craziest, potentially not smartest, lowest ROI thing that you would think as a professional, rather than where I probably used to say, yeah, we're not doing that. was to say, okay, let's take a moment and say, what are we trying to do here? Why is this coming up? Is it coming up because you need to curry a favor with somebody? Is it coming up because you feel like we have a brand gap? We have a brand gap, like what? Okay, then let's talk about how we can solve the brand gap. And I promise our logo on a napkin is not going to solve the brand gap, So for me, that's been the biggest idea of just try to correct, like stop and listen to it. So just like Bill and Amy were saying, but trick my mind a little bit to be like, okay, don't listen to the actual idea, but try to up level and abstract the concept, and then think through how could we help them solve that or address what they're trying to say in maybe less marketing speak.
Clearly, you're a bigger person than I am, and I admire that sort of. It's like in judo and karate. It's sort of taking the energy of their punch and sort of going with it and using it to your advantage. So I admire that. Now, as we're talking about admire, we're at that moment in the show where just sort of randomly I ask what Ben Franklin would say to this question of leadership. And Franklin was a really interesting leader because he was not a good public speaker. In fact, he hated public speaking, and yet he got so much done. And one of the reasons that he did is that he tried to give credit and push all of his ideas out to other people, so they were the ones who presented. And even through all of the various constitutional conventions, he was just behind the scenes doing these. So it's interesting to me when you would ask, what does he say about leadership? He says, and he really means he, she, they, that cannot obey, cannot command. And I thought that's really an interesting perspective. And I wonder if you think about that at all as a leader who works for a leader. How important is it that you sort of take the guidance from your boss or your board of directors? And it's an interesting perspective. Bill, I'm wondering, curious, does that resonate with you, that you both as a leader, you need to obey?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say, obey is kind of one of those weird value-laden words, but what I think really is sort of the intent behind it is that you actually need to really take in a lot of information, process it, and then try and use that information to help the teams make wiser decisions or other leaders make wiser decisions. Leadership is often a challenge of sort of getting to the root of an issue. And I think as we were talking earlier, it's kind of like, I want a 5x7 box colored red with the logo in the left, corner. That's not really something of interest or a problem that often we want to solve. We want to get at what is really behind the request. And so leading from behind in that respect means that you're sort of really trying to do a good job ferreting out what it is that the business or the individual is trying to achieve. And then you apply your expertise and your position, frankly, to help steer that in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a moment where on a show I actually did with Diana O'Brien, who at the time was the CMO of Deloitte, and she admitted that her CEO had asked her to run a program that she didn't think was a good idea. At the time, it was called Deloitte University, and it was a new idea. And she didn't think it was a good idea, but she did it. And I'm thinking that's the moment where someone else had a kind of big idea and you couldn't process it, but she did it, and it became like the signature thing of her career. And so that's, I think, maybe what Franklin was talking about is, okay, you're doing that. So I'm wondering, Toni, Amy, was there a moment where somebody suggested something to you and you didn't resonate, but eventually you got there?
I'm probably 100 every day. Maybe Amy, you have that, but
go ahead. You go first.
I would say that, gosh, there's so many programs. If in the tech world, it happened a lot, right? Where I was trying to understand, if I didn't understand the technology behind it, what was the why behind it, then how do we bring it to life, and then maybe try to shape that. I would say that there are certain things that have definitely taught me that what I think is the right idea or the right way to portray something is not always the right way. So this idea of obey and then command is just sort of tactically speaking really driven me to do a lot of things like A/B testing, right? Meaning, or testing of, just because I don't think it's right or I do think it's right, how does everybody else think about it? How does a buyer think about it? So I end up feeling a lot more around what is the ways that we get that information around what do we need to obey, what do we want to obey, and then how do we turn that into something that could be great and insightful. And a lot of times, and to be fully transparent, it's how much do I respect the person who's talking in the subject that we're talking about. And so it's not always respecting the person as an individual, but sometimes, you're back at the social media can be done by my kids. Why is it so hard? Comment that Amy made that I love. And then just thinking through, okay, take a minute. What are we trying to get to? And then aligning that tactics properly.
By the way, one of our listeners, Carol Hank, edited the Franklin quote and said, he, she, they that cannot align, cannot command, which I think is an interesting one. But I still think there's something really profound in this area that I hadn't really thought about is we're talking about listening as a great leader. And if your boss or the board of directors comes up with something, you have to process it. And you can't simply say, no, that's a bad idea. You can't dismiss their ideas because of that. And I love the notion that there's an A/B test so we can try it. But there's also just a recognition that every leader is fallible and every leader is going to make a mistake. And so we continue to have to sort of listen and make sure that we're, that we're not blind to opportunities. It could be right there because it's easy to do it.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I was just going to add that I think it's also trusting your leaders because I found over the year, there's always something that I don't know, right? Something else that's going on in the background, which is why they're do this path or don't do that. So I have examples of both things that I was like, this is amazing. Look at all these stats that support this great idea. And it didn't even get off the ground because they didn't let me and then I figured it out like a month later and something else, and the same as do this, even if I didn't understand it because I trusted them or believed that what I was going to do the right thing because of something else I didn't know about. And then it made sense later. So I do think I have learned that in my career to trust. Hopefully, I'm working for a good leader that I trust. And it usually there's always, you put it together later, but there's some super secret acquisition or new hire coming in or something that you just didn't understand. You didn't know what's going on.
It's such a good point. Felt that one. There are times where you have a broader perspective than your employees and you can't share it all. And I'm sure that's happened. And sometimes you just have to say, you're going to have to trust me on this one. I know I have some things about it and they're going to have to kind of, suck it up. So I'm wondering if any of you have, we talked a little bit about this at the top of the show, but sort of the best advice you've been given, and maybe it's in the context of who you are, but maybe it's just great leadership advice. And Amy, maybe you have something you thought about.
Oh gosh, I think the getting to know people, kind of like we were talking about earlier, and understand how they tick. And to me, listening is the biggest thing. You don't have to be loud to be a leader. You don't have to be an extrovert to be a leader. Be yourself, and bet on yourself, I guess, is a good one too. You can, if someone else thinks you can do it, you should think you can do it too.
Which reminds me, and I wanted to bring this up. This reminds me, has there ever been a moment where you didn't trust yourself? Like you said, I'm not ready for this job, and you talked yourself into it?
Of course. I mean, every time I've ever gotten a new job or a promotion, I always have that little self-doubt, bad guy, good guys on my shoulder. And I just take the chance and give I guess I just go back to what I said. If someone else believes that you can do it, you got to give yourself the chance. And you know what? You learn from failing. The old cliche is true. If that very cliche quote, if you don't reach for the stars or the moon or whatever, you won't get it, but you get dirt. I'm messing up that quote, but something about just try. What's the worst that can happen, I guess.
It's funny. That's a Leo Burnett quote. And it was that, if you reach for the stars, you won't come up with a handful of mud.
There you go.
And I'm inspired by Burnett because he started his agency at I think at 60. But the other thing I remembered that I wanted to add to this conversation was, and Toni was talking about this, which is the notion of listening. And the famous ad guy, Bill Bernbach, used to carry a little sheet up in his pocket that said, "They might be right." And it was about input he was getting from the client. He was one of the most creative individuals in the history of advertising. And he carried that note just to remind himself. Okay, Toni, best leadership advice you've ever been given?
My favorite is always assume positive intent, right? That idea that in the marketing world, people are generally trying to help, and it may come out in a funny way, in a rude way, in an unbelievably strange way. But if we assume that it's positive intent, both on the people we deal with as well as the teams and then inter-team dynamics, it has served me well for a very, very long time. Assume
positive intent. I have to say, I remember literally a 7th grade science teacher who said, "I know you're going to be great in this class." And it's like, I had no idea I was going to be great in this class, and I was really not. And he happened to have my older brother who was a really good science student, but I actually did well because he expected it. And so I love that notion of assuming positive intent. Okay, Bill, best leadership advice you've ever gotten?
Yeah, I think in terms of like growing as a leader, leadership is more of a commission than it is a position. If you think about kind of early career, you're sort of reaching for the stars, and a lot of that feels more like the level. And what people often don't understand is sort of that what comes along with the commission of leadership, and that's all of the the people management, the culture building, and the things that are not specific to the function that you're leading. It's kind of a lot of the other soft stuff that frankly, that was a big learning curve for me from when I was just starting to where I am now. And so it's more of a lived piece of advice in addition to sort of, I think, just general advice that I've gotten over time.
It's such an interesting, I've never heard that phrase, commission, not a position. And it really does sum up this conversation so well, that you're given this role, and you've sort of got to earn it, and it never stops, which I think is a really important part. And again, I'm thinking of some younger people who are listening, who are not CMOs, who are growing up in the business, and particularly young ladies who might not think they're ready for an opportunity. I'm curious, Amy, Toni, any words of advice for them as they aspire to be CMOs, but they go, "Oh my God, I don't know."
Yeah, they've done all those studies that men will apply for jobs if they have 5 of the 10 things. I'm paraphrasing here, and women have to have every single 10 thing before they even will allow themselves to apply for the job. So I would say, obviously, hard work pays off. Don't be a delegator. All of us, I think, are working managers, and we work as much as everybody else. So I think I say it to my kids all the time, hard work pays off, but don't be afraid to bet on yourself and give yourself the credit that you can try. You're not going to fail for trying, right? You're going to learn as you go along. So take the chance and work hard.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that study, and that because I had that front and center. I just didn't know if it was politically correct to even talk about it. But coming out of your mouth, it sounds just perfect. Okay, Toni, any final thoughts or words of advice?
I would say, excuse me, try. Obviously, I completely aligned with Amy's point. And then, just think through how to present a unique point of view, or solve a problem, or come to the table with a thought through potential solution. So, as Amy's saying, get out there and put yourself out there. My add-on to that would be by delivering a point of view or a particular solution or a creative new way of thinking of something, so that what you're putting out there is noticeable and memorable.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you, Amy, Bill, Toni. You're all amazing sports and leaders. Thank you, Ula, for your fantastic gin. And thank you, audience, for staying with us. Please join us in 2 weeks when we'll be distilling Analyst Relations with Isabel Papulias, Carlos Carvajal, and Noreen Galstian. Cue the music. Renegade Thinkers Live is produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our intern is Sam White. Our botanical expert is Nicole Hernandez. For show notes and past episodes, please visit renegade.com, home of quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.